So, I don't know if it is me to speak, but anyway, thank you very much for coming. We are not yet connected outside, and but we'll be. We were in this morning, and we will be at 4, and we're trying to be now. But it is a great pleasure to have you here in Ponta Delgada in the Azores, in the time zone which is more central in the earth. We just discovered, because you can talk with Chile in the afternoon, and we can talk with China in early morning, and also in a very nice place. The selection of the issue was done by me and Professor Luafi, that will edit the special issue, is in the end of this table. And the mobilization of these, some of you, was done by Peter Nijkamp. So it is this effort of personal connections and mobilization of a common aim, or common purpose, that in fact enlightens. Thank you very much. I think what we are doing here is very important. Two things are more important. One is that scientifically we have a common purpose with a very easy indicator known by everybody: death and disease. Much better than global warming, that we don't feel it, that we are not able yet to translate it to the people. Second, because it is global. Pandemic was global. Everybody suffered from it. And that's the role of science, is not only medical doctors. It's a role for us. So suddenly, we have a challenge that is common to all scientists around the world, and is felt by the people, is sensed by everybody. So if you are able to think about it and to transmit it in a way that is perceivable by everybody, then we have the media, then we have the social media, then we have everybody listen to it, and we'll be responsible for what you say and what you learn. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for Luafi for combining all these inputs, all these contributions around the world. And thank you very much for each one of you that was able to come here. Patricia from Chile, Peter from Holland, Eduardo from Brazil, Kathy from Belgium, Katrina from Poland, and Luafi from France and Algeria, and every one of you, Gabriela from Romania, and all of you. Thank you very much. Peter.
Thank you very much, Tomaz, for not only your introduction, but also for bringing us together. And of course, I also would like to thank the regional government for facilitating this meeting and being with us. This is not one of the standard meetings we normally would like to organize. This is a very special and extremely important meeting. It's not only dealing with medical issues. Some people think corona is only a medical problem, or is not a problem at all. That's another issue. But it has to do with the heart of social sciences, with planning, policy making. It's not only a matter of scientific interest, it's a matter of, as Tomaz has indicated, of the interest of the public, and it's a matter of public intervention and the limits of responsibilities of governance. Now, it is interesting that, of course, our world has gone through crises before. So the corona crisis in itself is not anything new. We have had many crises, wars, earthquakes, natural disasters, political turmoil. But this one, and that's very interesting, has prompted more interest than any other event in the world. Google has just calculated that over the past 1 year, 1.5 years, more than 200,000 scientific publications have been put forward. And never in our history has there been any issue in the world where within a limit of almost 1 year, 200,000 scientific publications have been produced. So it isn't a matter of interest of many scientists and policymakers. But at the same time, if there are already 200,000 publications, why should we meet? Because all the wisdom is there, you might argue. Now that is not the case. I cannot claim that I will ever be able to read 200,000 publications, but the few ones I have read always bring to light that we are all the time at the limits of our knowledge. Most of these 200 publications do not give any solution, do even not articulate precisely the causality mechanisms, they just articulate the problem. And I think what we would like to do, and it's one of the merits of this meeting here, we would like to go beyond the formulation of the problem. What can be done, not only ad hoc, but what can be done also in terms of strategic thinking in the future? Because one thing is clear, there will be pandemics all the time. They always have been there in human history, and they will be there with us also in the future. And I give you one or two examples. My former home doctor, he got retired 4 years ago, and he thought, what can I do? And then he decided to write a dissertation. A dissertation on infectious diseases in the past, in this home city where I am from, the city of Leiden in the Netherlands. Very interesting. He had more data than we can ever dream of, because in the past, if there was somewhere in a city an infection disease, the mayor of the city had dictated it shall be precisely recorded. This house number, this person, this age, this gender, and etc. The duration of the illness and death cases, everything was there. And now for my own city I have a map which on a daily basis indicates exactly where all the cases, there was cholera and pest, etc., where all the cases could be found. We would dream nowadays if we would have all these types of data, but privacy regulations prevent us, of course, from having all these data. But we have very precise maps from the past. And if you look into these maps, and that is interesting, diseases are never spread uniformly around space. And that's where regional science and geography comes in. It's not just randomly distributed. In any city in the past, you would see that the diseases, especially infectious disease, can be found mostly in specific areas, like where the poor people live, where the workers are, where there are cultural minorities, etc. And if I take that map of my own city from centuries ago, and I put that map on New York or London or any other city, it's almost the same type of map. The distribution of pandemics is unequally distributed. It has unequal consequences. And that brings us, of course, into the era of the distributional impacts, poverty, wealth, and space. And that is interesting because in a study done many years back, in fact by the father of modern epidemiology, John Snow, he did a study on London. And it was very interesting. By then, he studied cholera. And he knew already cholera is an infectious disease. That was the minimum knowledge, medical knowledge he had. It's an infectious disease. But how come? And the general paradigm in the medical sciences in the 19th century was, it's bad air. London, of course, was full of bad air, and the hypothesis was bad air. And then what he did, empirical facts, collecting facts. Where are the diseases? Making an estimate of so-called bad air, and then making a map of London. And there was no correlation superficially between bad air, so-called bad air, and infectious diseases, in this case cholera. And then he looked more carefully into the map, and he did a test on the quality of water. And then it turned out there was a 100% correlation between the quality of water and the appearance of cholera in the city. And later on it was tested also in New York and other cities. And then it turned out that water was one of the channels through which infectious diseases were transmitted. Again, environmental quality, space, and medical events, they are closely linked together. And nowadays we hope that we have enough wisdom collected all together so as to understand first the mechanism, then to predict it, and of course, hopefully to prevent it. Now, I give you one example. It's based on a study which was just published 2 weeks ago by a Greek colleague of mine and myself, published in Letters in Spatial Resource Sciences, on the network impacts of the current pandemics. And the hypothesis we always have is that it's good to work at home. Online activity, teaching, shopping, work, and etc. Now, if that is a true observation, this is testable, because then we can draw the first hypothesis that in those countries where online working and online shopping is already taking place to a considerable extent, that these countries and these regions would be less affected by COVID-19 than others who are still in, let's say, a traditional mode of physical movement, etc. What we found, strangely enough, first you have the policy off situation 2019, then you have 2020, 2021, etc., using a whole range of international OECD data for network behavior and the appearance of COVID-19 in various countries. It's not evident at all that in those countries which were the forerunners in terms of, let's say, digital society, like Sweden or the Netherlands, that these countries would be much better off in a pandemic period than other countries. That is simply not the case. So this is just a simple illustration of one of the research questions where we know space plays a role, network behavior may play a role, but whether or not physical movement in itself, and that's also the topic of this conference, pandemics, location and mobility, whether all these factors are properly understood by us given the current knowledge we have and given the current sophisticated spatial econometric modeling expertise we have. So there is a whole range of different questions to be addressed. And what we hope, of course, with this meeting is to have a careful thinking, critical thinking, criticizing each other compared to our conventional wisdom, and see whether somewhere we can find a better understanding of the complexity, a better understanding of the prevention mechanisms of governments. Is a lockdown situation always preferable? Or is a very liberal policy, we have representatives from many countries here, is a liberal policy more advantageous? Simply, the international evidence does not immediately lead to any conclusion. And what we can already foresee is that in the next years to come, there will be many governments asking the question, did we have the right policy? Almost in every country nowadays already parliaments start investigations, did our government the right decisions, etc., etc. There will be a massive volume of studies. What has been the most effective policy? Was the Swedish model or the German model, the Dutch model, the UK model, the Brazilian model better than any other model? For the time being, the facts are not so convincing. except of course when you would say if you are in complete isolation like New Zealand, okay, but then it's easy. There is no contagion, and then of course that's a simple remedy. But it does not mean that as soon as you open the border, that things will remain as they were. You might even be worse off. So there's a whole range of different questions in terms of current knowledge, prevention mechanisms, and also scientific research. Because our data are by far not yet sufficient to justify at this moment a concluding answer. And I hope that, well, bringing together this great, nice group of excellent scientists and great knowledge from all countries, many countries in the world, that somehow we can develop a new research agenda, which also would lead to new types of contributions to be published in the special issue of Regional Science Policy and Practice, of which Tomaz is the main editor, and Luafi will be assisting in getting a nice special issue so as to clarify all these questions. We are not yet there, by far not, but I'm so happy that all of you are here, and I really look forward to a great discussion. So, welcome.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. It's a great pleasure to be here with you. I have to say that's a very, very special meeting for me. That's actually my very first meeting in presence after COVID-19 started. So I'm somehow getting emotional because of this physical contact that we are having, interacting ourselves. And while Peter was giving his intervention, I was thinking about where we were almost 2 years ago. If you think what were our research projects in January to last year, COVID was definitely not part of it for most of us. But suddenly we are caught by this pandemic, and this topic came into our research agenda all of a sudden. In my personal case, in São Paulo, the first COVID case was at the end of February. The first week of March, I received a call from the governor of the state of São Paulo, inviting me to be part of economic council to look how to deal with that from an economic perspective, together with a special group of doctors and infectologists. And it was very, very invigorating in intellectual terms, and also because as regional scientists, we had the tools, good or bad, that enable us to act, to enter this research area right away, right? You see, I think, I know that many of us here in this room have engaged in helping policymakers to give some scientific reasoning on how to act in their regions, in their countries. But we had to learn how to deal with this fact for which we didn't have any recent historical experience with the available tools that we had. We are now, after these 200,000 publications in 1 year, in a much better situation.
I suspect there are going to be a lot more hundreds of papers to be published as we gather more information, as other issues unfold after the pandemic. We are focused, of course, on the immediate impacts of this disease, but there's going to be an economic disease that is going to come after that. And there's going to be consequences as to the way we dealt with this pandemic. There's going to be a lot of things to study, a lot of evaluations to be made, because much of the action that was undertaken to deal with the pandemic was based on very scarce information, very unknowledgeable understanding, or very little understanding of effectively what was happening. We were all surprised, and even over here, we were totally surprised, and basically, at one stage, the main thesis was, we don't know anything about this, so let's close everything. I will confess, I was scared. Being an economist and understanding the dynamics of the economy, I was scared because I could understand what is the implication of a total shutdown of many activities, and of the implications of all the government policies to refinance companies and to refinance people and to keep jobs in a very unusual manner. Okay, it was all, I think, for the good of people, for the stability, but we have to also look at what is going to happen towards the future.